Well, Netflix is having an interesting month, to say the least. This was almost an entirely different video talking about that. But on the advice of my lawyers and some dude that I know on the internet, I'm not gonna do that video. So, Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious in Dungeon, coming to us from Studio Trigger, a full adaptation of the manga of the same name. Not only notable for being the first full-length manga adaptation from the Triggermen, it's also the first full series from them in a few years, the last being the Gridman sequel series. Some of us were getting a little bit worried about them. You may have seen some online discourse about Dungeon Meshi, you may have seen some fan art of Dungeon Meshi, you may have seen comparisons about characters in Dungeon Meshi to things relatable in real life. You may have seen this man's ass. But you may ask yourself, what is Dungeon Meshi? Dungeon Meshi is a cooking show. Well, that sort of covers some of the show. It doesn't really hit the entire spectrum of what the show offers. Dungeon Meshi is a slice of life that happens to take place in a fantasy world. No, that's not really right either. There's a lot more to it than that. Dungeon Meshi is a character-based drama about neurodivergency and relating to people. While I don't disagree that there are things to relate to about some of the characters in that way, I think there may be a lot more to be had here than just the characters and the way they interact. Dungeon Meshi is a fantasy action series. There are a lot of great combat moments and interesting thoughts about how the encounters work. I would argue, though, that it's not technically action-focused, so really, when you get down to it, Dungeon Meshi is weird, and not like Republican Penis Inspection Day weird. I'm talking about how it doesn't quite fit in any one mold you may have for anime. From the word go, you are given a concept in episode 1. Cooking show in a dungeon. Bam. Not a lot like it. Stands on its own. Kind of a questionable plot hook for the party, but hey, I've seen worse. I've DM'd worse than that. This is a food show, you may say to yourself. Then as episodes 2 and 3 roll around, you hear bits and pieces of backstory and world building, things that make you reinvest your attention into other parts of the show. What the fuck is this? What the fuck did he mean by that? This is a food show, right? And then by the time we get to the later episodes and Studio Trigger flexes their anime-saving muscles, there's a lot of unexpectedness to unpack. Characters that appear one note are actually chords of shared experiences. Expository sentences of world building become the foundations of entire concepts later on in this dungeon. This guy? That's actually a kobold. 5e and several other pieces of media taught me that they were more like lizards, but here, Dogman. The world building of this show is so goddamn good. There's entire other essays you can go watch about it, arguably once you have actually watched the show, mind you. It follows the kind of structure I like to do with my players at the D&D table, where I spoon feed them little bits of information piece by piece, sometimes not even to the whole group. Then when someone casually mentions, oh yeah, the king of this place, I heard he's not real and the whole thing is a sham to cover up them exiling and polymorphing their prince. They all look at that player with shock and realization, and then they turn to me and go, oh. Dungeon Meshi isn't quite that specific, but it definitely does give you an IV drip of pure speculation fuel after the first few episodes set the pacing. And it just keeps going. Exploratory narratives about the nature of life and death and the cycle of rebirth, grief, mourning, identity, nihilism, regret, nightmares, forgiveness, revenge, vitriol, misunderstanding, relief. A wide mass of themes you, again, did not expect from a show about cooking food in a dungeon. All the while, the animation from Trigger is superb, blending the most mundane of cooking segment animation that teeters closer to something you'd see from the thousands of anime cooking clips you see on TikTok or Twitter, with action sequences that are more to the recipe that we know Trigger for, this time set in a more traditional TTRPG fantasy aspect, which is something I've wanted them to explore since Little Witch Academia. The music and sound design match and sometimes rival these visuals, especially in the more subtle moments in this dreary dungeonscape. And as the show manages to turn around toward the end of its first arc, bizarrely, it takes a moment to recuperate, with a major goal completed, but with more goals along the way, and only more questions for both the adventuring party and the watcher. The narrative turns inward. This introspection lets you sit for that moment and take in what you've seen so far, and oddly enough, you will find yourself circling back around on what you thought the show is. And you can take this statement at face value, or you can assert your own opinion on what I'm really saying here. It is a food show. Thank you all so much for watching. This video is brought to you by the Delicious in Dungeon Volume 1 paperback that you can get at the affiliate link in my description. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.